big response. Love that. All right. Well, um, first of all, thank you for letting me be here. For the few of you who might not know me, I am Jordan Pease, and I am so excited to be here. Um, I first of all wanted to point out to you guys that some of you in the back might be a little too far away to notice, but I have a physical condition. Uh, yeah, it's a rare physical condition where the doctors have told me I am about 75% more attractive than the average human male. Um, but I am married, ladies. Most of you are too, okay? So I know who you are. I'm watching you, so don't be watching me. No, cripple jokes, man. um, Franklin Roosevelt, he was the president in the wheelchair. He just hated cripple jokes. Some say he probably couldn't stand them. Where's the badoom? No, so with having a disability, it's been a huge part of my journey. One might say being born physically broken might relate very well to this the current theme that we're on, which is breaking point. And I would say that it's definitely been a huge part of my journey in discovering who Jesus is. So, for those of you who may not have heard, I was raised in a very devout, wonderful Mormon family. And a lot of you might not know a lot about Mormons, but I was raised in a praying family. I was raised, again, in a very loving family. And I was raised in a very legalistic family. And every day in my house, we would all pray that I would be healed and that I would have enough faith and enough worthiness to be healed as well. And when you're in a very loving and a very legalistic family, you very much want to please your parents. This creates a very destructive cycle. Man. So you would go from being about as good as you can be, like really trying, like I want to prove to the Lord I am worthy of salvation. And you would fail, and you'd fail, and you'd fail, and you would inevitably be brought to rebellion. And so I was in this vicious cycle of trying to please my parents and God, and inevitably going to rebellion, and back to essentially trying to be the next Mormon bishop. I very much believed this faith. Very, very involved with it and loved it probably more than anything at the time. In fact, I met my beautiful wife at Mormon camp. She also was Mormon, and I met her at Mormon camp, and we really hit it off. And several years later, I married her in the Mormon temple, where we were sealed to be married for time and all eternity. And to get married in the temple, which is also where you learn the secret things that you glean for your salvation, you have to answer worthiness questions. There's about 12 of them. And in order to marry my wife, I had to lie 12 times to my bishop of how worthy I was. And from then, again, a couple years later, we had David. And this really got us thinking. If we're going to have a child and teach this child about God, we better know who God is. And that really started a journey of going through the Old Testament, which was inspired by a USU teacher that, a USU pastor, Utah State University, that I had been in an argument with for years. And what we did is we essentially went back and forth through the 10 Commandments. And as we battled, he convinced me in a very patient and very kind and gracious way that I was guilty of not just thou shalt not steal, not just not just the ones that we all know that we're guilty of, but guilty of all 10. And he used Matthew quite a lot as an example. If you read Matthew 5, 27 through 28, you get this. You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now I'm an adulterer because I know I was guilty of that. Matthew 5, 21, 22. You have heard it was said to people long ago, thou shalt not murder. Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister is subject to judgment. My brothers and sisters, I stood in awe before this pastor and before my God that I was guilty of murder. That I was a murderer. And no better than those rotting away at prison that we judge every day. But God's condemnation really hit me, and it made sense to me before his grace. And I was scared. One might say broken. I realized that I was guilty of every atrocity I had been asked by my Father to not commit. And you will never guess where I found the grace part. During this sermon, I will be confessing to you, my congregation, my brothers and my sisters, some of the most shameful and embarrassing parts of my life. And this is definitely one of them. So I found grace while viewing and as a slave to pornography. I was cheating on my wife with my computer regularly. And as a heinous sinner, God found a way to reach down and pull me out in the crux of my addiction. As there was one time I was playing with my computer, and I had an overwhelming fear overtake me. And I went into my room, and I locked the door to separate myself from the computer. And I just prayed. as a Mormon, just prayed knowing I wasn't worthy, knowing I was destined for condemnation, worthy condemnation by a just and good God. That's scary when you know that God has punished you while he is good and worthy. That is some fear, my friends. That is a breaking point right there. And so I am in the door and I'm praying and I'm sobbing and I'm begging to my Lord what to do. And my beautiful wife, who is also not a Christian at this time, she's Mormon, she comes in and tries to open the door and it's locked. She's like, what are you doing in there? I unlock it for her, and she walks in and I tell her everything. I pour my heart out to her, and she has known that I have had an issue with this in the past, and it had been a very difficult part of our marriage. And then she takes a deep breath, lets it out, and she grabs my hands and she looks me in the eyes and she says, Jordan, wipes the tears from my face. I want you to know that I forgive you for not just this time, but all the past times, and not just those times, but every future time that you will ever look at pornography again. I forgive you. It is over. And you don't ever need to be sorry to me again. And I remember thinking in that moment, as a Mormon guy, how is it that my wife is so much more powerful than my God? That she can let that go. But what I didn't realize is that not only can he do what my wife did, he does do it. And furthermore, he breaks the chains, right? The chain breaker that we learned about last time. When I found who God was, he didn't just forgive me of porn. He took my addiction away. He pulled it from me. He removed the chains. He did what my wife did and so much more. And without the effort on my part, it was a miracle healing that he did for me. A miracle healing. How many times do we find ourselves like Samson after his haircut, pulling at our own chains, saying to God when we do so, I don't believe you're the chain breaker. I don't believe you're the miracle worker. I don't believe you're the promise keeper. Oof. I don't believe you're the light in the darkness. God breaks our chains. And I had to learn that the hard way many times. That Christianity is not a faith of religion, of worthiness, of practice, but of healing. Well, God's grace was telling me, or what I had to learn through this, that God's grace wasn't just telling me that I was suddenly okay to do anything I wanted, right? So yes, it's not a faith of religion, but it's also not a faith of relativism, the two dangerous R's of Christianity, religion and relativism. No, it wasn't permission for me to do suddenly anything I wanted. It was a substitution of my works for the works of Christ. I was made righteous through good deeds, but they were no longer mine. They were Christ's good deeds. And now, since I believed that, my works reflected that belief. Ooh, powerful. That my works suddenly looked like I believed, that my works were no longer part of my salvation. I wanted to do good. In fact, I was Mormon and Christian for about 2 years, called by what is the elders' quorum. I was an elder in the church by this point. Called by elders' quorum to teach, called by my bishop to teach the elders in the church. And by this point, I was in the church, and I no longer believed. But I was in the church because my wife wasn't quite out yet, and I wanted to be gentle with her. So I told my bishop, if you believe that God has called me to teach elders quorum, I'm happy to do it. But I want you to know that I will be teaching from the New Testament and not the lesson manuals. And he agreed. And so I got to spend 1 year, that's right. I got to spend 1 year of my remaining time as a Mormon teaching what I had learned about Jesus to my Mormon brothers and sisters. Man, isn't God the chain breaker? Man, doesn't he take our weaknesses, our breaking points, and turn them into strengths? Man, my Mormon background, and suddenly I am before my old church, preaching them the gospel. The things my God does. And ultimately, by the grace of God, my wife was led from the Mormon church and into truth. And here we are today. So here is really the second part of my conversion. I would say that my conversion is in 2 parts. One, learning. The first, primarily learning that it was not by religion. This was really coming to learn that it was not by relativism. You see, Mormonism exalts man. And when I say man, I don't mean mankind. I mean men. By quite a lot. Women cannot find salvation in Mormonism without a celestial husband through eternal marriage, either through this life or in the next. You need a husband, and I was sealed to my wife as her Savior. Because of Bible teachings, we found this disturbing, with good reason. But being fresh off the block of Mormonism, we found ourselves looking for answers, and we turned to the most reasonable of answers, feminism. You can laugh, I know, it's cringe. I told you I was going to tell you the most embarrassing parts about me. So we turned to feminism instead of the Bible, and what happened is my wife gradually became the head of the home. We had this idea that we would be unified. We will both be the heads of the home, and that's not what happened. My wife became the head of the home. I grew lazy, and she grew, what would the word be? I don't want to say it. She's sitting back there. You can guess. let's see. So, because of this, tensions started to mount in my marriage. All the time I had to play video games while she was working and providing. It's not how it was meant to be, because I wasn't mothering my child while I was a stay-at-home dad. I wasn't meant for it. Tensions grew so much. And my sweet wife and I, who I view as my twin soul, were on the cusp of divorce. We had grown to view the Bible through a deconstructionist lens, through a political lens. And God started making less and less sense. It's so embarrassing, God doesn't want me to talk about it. So it started making less and less sense. God started making less and less sense. And I was on the verge of atheism. That sort of, yes, Jesus is a good symbol sort of Christianity. Jesus and his resurrection, they're wonderful symbols. I'm not sure if they're literal kind of Christianity. And I was losing my marriage and had no one to turn to. My best friend was unrecognizable to me and I to her. And I went to my room again, closed the door again, and I said the most prideful prayer that I honestly tremble to repeat it. I said to my God, my Creator, I'm giving you one last chance. If you're real, save my marriage, I said to my Lord. And with a prayer of such deep pride, I wouldn't have expected him to answer. But God loved us while we were yet sinners. Amen? So God speaks to me. And he says, okay, you want me to save your marriage. Go to my word. So I randomly opened the Bible. Where did I land? I kid you not. I landed on Ephesians chapter 5, 21, 25 were the verses that caught my eye. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body and himself, its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to everything to their wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. And I looked towards my God one more time and I said, you're crazy! You want me to take this to my feminist wife? You're crazy. called my God crazy. And yet, he is still patient with me as he responds back to me again, a second time. And what does he say? He says, "You're losing her anyway, stupid." I deserved it. And so I said, okay, I'll do it your way. What do I have to lose? Let us assume you are literally real. I mean, you spoke to me twice. And let us assume that I should take charge of my home as a man. And I started noticing the nature of Christ towards the church in this passage. It's interesting because it's not what people seem. You notice it starts with submit to one another. It's not that my wife just submits to me. It's that I submit to her, and how do we submit to each other? For Christ, in his sacrifice, submitted to God by performing a submission to us, his church. Did he not? Did he not submit himself to the cross? I would say he got the short end of the stick, to be honest. I noticed that it wasn't my job to rule my home. It was my job that any time that there was a choice where my wife could sacrifice for me or I for her, what was my duty? To sacrifice for my wife. Don't buy that thing you want, so she can get what she wants. Work so she can stay home. Be a man. Be like Christ. And let her be like the church. If you're a tyrant, you are not heading your home, my brothers. If you are a tyrant, I say again, you are not heading your home. I started noticing the nature of Christ towards the church through this. And in Romans 5:8, we read, God demonstrates his love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And now, this made sense to me as I converted from Mormonism to Christianity, but now I was looking at it from the way I should treat my wife. Is she yelling at me? I still love her. Is she grumpy that day? I still love her. While my wife is a sinner, I love her, and I sacrifice for her. I grow in patience as I lead my home, not tyrannical kingly power. John 3:16, we find a similar sort of message. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that who believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. My wife submits to me, and I die for her. Are we starting to see the relationship here? Are we starting to see why the socio-political landscape of feminism fails in the gospel? So it's sacrificial. And I started to become masculine again. Fancy that. So I really started job hunting, and I looked for a job, and I found a job, and we read in First Timothy 5:8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's us, guys. I armed myself to keep my family safe. Nehemiah, Route 66, right? Nehemiah 4:13 through 14. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall and at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. I'm so dyslexic, I'm sorry. After, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. Man, we have really misrepresented that word in modern day. Who is great and awesome. We fight and fight for your families, your sons, daughters, your wives, and your homes. Shouldn't our wives feel safe with us, my brothers? Man, we should become warriors as men, not looking for fights. Oh man, you train with your weapon, your sword. And I would even say the most difficult part of that training is learning how to keep it in its sheath. But if you do not have a weapon, and if you are not prepared to defend your family, are you heading your home? I took charge with my marriage and parenting. 1 Timothy 3:4. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him. He must do so in a manner worthy of full respect. So with your children, don't be a tyrant. So this led me discovering non-feminism, and biblical marriage. It rescued it. It was insane the way that it changed my marriage, and it really kind of led me to weed out the other cockroaches that I did not see within my marriage, within what I was doing, within my deconstructionist view of the Bible. And I wish we had more time because I would go really deep into it. But so many things, so many deconstructionist ideas. My wife asks me, what is different about you? I don't understand. And I told her what had happened to me. She says, I'm not the head of the home anymore, am I? I said, no. No, I've taken charge. And I want to lead you. And I want you to trust me. And I'm going to fail because God has given me this calling to be as the Lord to you. And I'm going to fail because I'm not Him. But I hope that you can be patient and gracious with me. Something amazing happens. My wife submits once again to God's way and follows me again, first from Mormonism and then from deconstructionism. Man, my God is the chain breaker. So God broke me while I perceived myself as righteous. He offered forgiveness as a free gift, while never losing patience with me as I went to the world instead of him. While rescued in belief alone, God gave me a heart of obedience to accept him as the Bible dictates. I know we're running short on time, but I feel moved to share with you something I wrote after experiencing these things. I didn't even bring it with me. It just keeps urging me in the back of my mind to share it with you of what God can do with closed eyes once they open. It's a poem I wrote called The Grave. And it goes like this. In the grave, my final bed, just as all the prophets said, helpless condition, incurable state, an emboldened effort I must make. Just move a finger, wiggle a toe. I concentrate to make it go. I can do it, plays in my head, but there is no moving for the dead. How about I speak, recite, or sing? Then surely death will no longer cling. I brace myself for the miracle now, only to realize I can't open my mouth. What just happened? How could this be? Is all hope really as dead as me? It's over now. I failed the test. A dead man's just a zombie at best. As I lay helpless, cold, and distraught, my mind wanders to the lies I was taught. Just do your best and you'll be fine. Yet here in my grave, the worms still dine. Their lies had led me to be broken and ghoulish. Advice on living from the dead is just foolish. But my thoughts finally rest on the one who now lives, whose grave has been beaten, whose mercy he gives. Could it truly be free? Well, then what of my time, spending all of my efforts on deeds that were mine? Hope must be in him. He's all that I've got. For all of my works have left me to rot. No question no more. I know what to do. I shout to my Lord, I trust you. And my words echo loud in my hollow grave, the first sound from my voice since I was death's slave. He did it, I cried, as my hand burst from the soil, the end of my death and my heart's turmoil. I leap for joy right out of my grave and thank my Lord Jesus. I'd finally been saved. It just comes out of us in words sometimes, doesn't it? I wanted to share that with you to show as a perfect example of what God did to me, of how he has moved me to psalm. I shared with you at the beginning that from childhood I had been praying and praying and praying for healing, that God would heal me. I no longer pray for healing anymore, my brothers and sisters. Why? Because I believe that I stand before you a completely healed man, that you have witnessed a miracle by me being with you as a Christian today. I believe that whether on 2 legs or 4, that when I walk through the valley of Gehenna, I will fear no evil, and I will fear no death, because I have been healed by the precious blood of our Savior. Prayers for healing answered. Amen.